Well, good morning, everyone. Minnesotans expect one thing from their elected officials, to show up and do the job they were sent here to do. That's a basic duty, not a special request. Serving in public office is a privilege, and it comes with responsibilities. Responsibilities that start with simply being present. Right now, some DFL legislators are making excuses, claiming they're working from home or in their districts. Let's be real, they're not sworn in. There's no official business they can do. It's a flimsy excuse to avoid their duty and answering to the people. This is about following the law and respecting our democratic institutions. Minnesotans deserve leaders who take their oath seriously and recognize the honor of serving their communities. Tomorrow marks the beginning of a new era in Minnesota. With Speaker Demuth at the helm, we will bring back accountability, fiscal responsibility, and good governance. The days of fraud, free spending, and hiding from hard votes are over. For those who refuse to fulfill their basic duty, we stand ready to begin the constitutional process of recall. We are committed to holding every legislator accountable. If you don't show up for the job, you shouldn't keep it. Thank you. Now I'd like to turn it over to Attorney Ryan Wilson to walk through the legal process.
Can you identify yourself, please?
Oh, Alex Plekish, Chairman of the Republican Party.
Could you spell it, please?
Plechash, first name Alex. Thanks for asking.
Good morning, Ryan Wilson, attorney for the Republican Party of Minnesota. Chairman Plekich described the reasons why these recall petitions may be initiated. I'm going to talk a little bit about the process by which they'll happen. So the first step is that for each legislator, activists, supporters, Minnesotans, like those here gathered with us today, will gather 25 signatures to initiate the recall. Those will be filed with Secretary Simon, who will transmit them to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court will then review those and turn them over, if they find grounds, to a special master. The special master will review it, and then it'll go back to the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court decides that the facts and the legal basis is sufficient, that will then go on back to the communities to gather approximately 5,000 to 6,000 signatures per district, 25% of the voters in the last general election for that district. And if that threshold is met within 90 days, then the governor must order a recall election. That recall election will happen. If it's successful, an open seat will occur, a vacancy will happen, and a special election will be called. Happy to turn it over to Representative Altendorf to discuss more about the stakes.
First and last name spell, please.
Ryan Wilson, RyanWilson.
Representative Pam Altendorf from District 20A. And as the session is scheduled for us to start tomorrow, from the House side of things, we ended the 2024 session with the Democrats forcing through what we called the Grand Theft Omnibus Bill. And Melissa Hortman was quoted as saying they had to do what they had to do to force their agenda through. Now, here we are in 2025, starting out as a tie. They lost that tie because of cheating in District 40B, and now acting like sore losers are not coming to work. Another reason that I want to bring up that we are very concerned about is the Republicans in the House. We announced last week that we, as Leader Demuth is elected to be the Speaker, that we were forming a committee to investigate fraud. In Minnesota, we have a huge fraud problem, and it's well documented. Over $500 million of fraud under the Walz administration. This is something, whether Democrats or Republicans, we all can get behind, that we need to get to the root of this fraud and investigate it. And so it's very concerning to see the Democrats refusing to come to work and for us to work for the people of Minnesota to root out this fraud.
Representative, could you spell your first and last name, please?
It's Pam, P-A-M, Altendorf, A-L-T-E-N-D-O-R-F.
Chairman, if you'd like to answer any questions that may have. Yep.
What do you have to say about what happened yesterday?
Well, we're still investigating as to what actually occurred. I only just heard about it last night, but I think the statutes are pretty clear about the process in which the new session gets sworn in. So it doesn't appear that they have done it according to the law. We will take a look at that. But as far as I'm concerned, people should be showing up to the session tomorrow to do the thing we've always done, which is to get sworn in properly.
Brian, could you tell us a little bit about, what is the threshold? So you just have to get 25 signatures and then you can take it to the Supreme Court? And then what's the threshold for review, for letting it go forward?
Correct. So there's been several recall petitions attempted throughout the last couple of decades. I think almost every governor has had one attempted against them, typically under grounds of malfeasance, so failure to do their job the way that it should have been done. We're bringing this petition under nonfeasance, the failure to do their job, to do a duty of their job. We are hopeful that the Supreme Court will agree with our position, which is that one of the most basic duties of a legislator is to show up and to legislate, to be on the floor, to debate, to pass bills, to advance bills, to vote yes or no, not to run away from their duties, not to stay home, not to do the equivalent of running out and pulling the fire alarm to prevent a vote. And so we believe that that nonfeasance will be grounds for a recall petition.
Your thought process is fascinating.
Well, isn't this, I mean, in reality, isn't this really, aren't you trying, isn't this a threat? I mean, isn't it likely they'll show up for work at some point? I mean, isn't this just sort of, you're rallying your sabers?
We hope that they show up for work every day, including on day one. And so, the Constitution allows, and this was passed in 1996, so that the people would have a safety valve in the event that their legislators were so derelict that their nonfeasance rose to a recall. And so this gives an opportunity for the people to speak up when their legislators aren't doing their job.
Have you found any evidence that this has been used successfully or unsuccessfully?
We've never had a situation like this in the history of the legislature where 66 members of the caucus are unwilling to show up for work. And so this type of petition, since it was allowed in 1996, has not been brought on these grounds.
Is it your position that what happened, you're a lawyer, is it your position that what happened yesterday is legal, or have you researched that at all?
Well, hot off the press last night, Minnesota Statute 3.05 certainly seems on point as to how legislators should assemble and be sworn in at the start of session. The Democrats claim to have other laws that they relied on without citing to those laws, so we'll see what their position is. But again, Minnesota Statute 3.05 seems pretty clear when the legislator convenes, how that happens, and how people are sworn in.
Thank you. I can't read that, so I'm going to ask you some questions real quick. Your grounds will be submitted with those 25 signatures.
Correct.
to the Supreme Court.
Yes.
So you will lay out your case. And does the special master initially make the judgment as to whether the grounds are sufficient and then reports back to the Supreme?
There'll be an initial review by the Supreme Court. They'll then send it on to the special master who they'll appoint. That special master will look at then they'll hold a hearing and they'll look at the facts. Did what we allege actually happen? Did it not? And then they'll send that back to the Supreme Court. They have a certain number of days to be able to decide whether the preponderance of evidence is met. All in, that whole part of the process takes about 50 days, 51 days. And then from there, there's 90 days, assuming that the grounds are met, about 90 days for the signatures, 25% of the signatures in the district to be collected. If they're collected, a recall will happen, meaning people will vote yes or no, do you want to recall this legislator? If that passes, then you'll have a special election.
And your expertise now on governors calling special elections, how long, if the signatures are valid and it's certified, how long does the governor have to call that special election?
Well, there's two elections will be called. One is the recall election, and then if that's successful, a special election after that. The special election has to be called as soon as possible, depending on the timing when all this happens, likely within 35 days of when a vacancy occurs. Yeah, so that's the...
And convening the recall election first, what's the time period?
I don't recall that, nor I don't believe that's defined in statute. I'd have to look again, but I think that's more open to the governor's discretion.
Won't the Supreme Court just dismiss this as moot because by the time that it gets to them, the special elections will have been held?
Well, there's a case to be made, and we'll certainly argue that the fact that you have not shown up for work multiple days, weeks, perhaps months, that nonfeasance is not cured by then later coming back to work. For example, if somebody an official chooses to embezzle money, and they embezzle for several days, but then stop doing it, the fact that they stop doing it doesn't cure what they did in the past.
Do you think the Supreme Court would actually want to wade into what's basically a separation of powers dispute here?
Well, I mean, they have a constitutional duty to weigh in. That's what was passed as a constitutional amendment in 1996. Statute outlines the process for it. There are certainly thorny issues here between, various departments. But really, this falls solely in the legislature at this point. It's not the judicial branch, it's not the legislative or the executive branch, but it's the legislature. And so, I don't anticipate a separation of powers issue here.
What is your threshold for initiating recall? 1 day, a week?
We're gonna see how this week plays out. The statute requires that there will be repeated failures to do a known duty. And if there are repeated failures, Chairman has expressed that the Republican Party of Minnesota and its members are ready and willing and able to go forward with collecting these signatures.
So do you expect to have these petitions, it doesn't sound like it, but do you expect to have them in by the end of the week, or is it a wait and see?
I'll let Chairman speak to the timing of that.
Thank you for the question. We do expect to be able to act very quickly. We know that this is going to happen, barring some miracle, and so we are prepared with our grassroots to do just that. So when the time comes when we determine that the nonfeasance has occurred, I would kind of venture to say more than 2 days, maybe 3 days. At that point, we're ready. So I would expect that by the end of the week, we could actually return those signatures.
Chairman, I have a question about the Senate. Can you just respond what you think about Senator Mitchell trying to delay her trial till May?
Well, I'd like to keep this press conference focused on the issue at hand, which is what's happening tomorrow with the session. We can certainly deal with that later, but thanks for the question.
So once it gets submitted, you said 50 days and then 90 days, so it could take a while, but it's your position that it's still worth?
Well, whether it's worth it or not, I'll let Chairman can speak to that. Yes.
No, I'm sorry, could you speak to the days again? I didn't quite, you said 50, 51, and then 90?
Yeah, so once the Supreme Court determines that the threshold is met, the preponderance of evidence has been proved, you have 90 days to be able to collect what are 25% of the 25% of the people that voted in the prior general election for that office. 25%, that's your threshold number. And so it works out to be about 6,000 signatures per legislative district that you'd have to gather, and you have 90 days to do that.
What was the 50 days?
That's the time from when you submit the petition to the Supreme Court for the first, in the first instance, through when the special master, and then the Supreme Court reviews whether there's sufficient grounds to go forward with collecting the signatures.
But they have made it any harder?
Well,
Do you know how this compares to other state recalls? I mean, it just seems really hard.
and we haven't had a successful recall from the legislature ever, nor a governor. We've seen other states do that occasionally, California being one of them, and they have a lower threshold. And Minnesota chose to make it a high bar so that we can have stability in government. But they did make a bar that can be crossed, and we believe that happened here. And so it's important, again, safety check, important check and balance by the people to be able to say when our legislators aren't willing to show up for work, we have a way to be able to get people in there to do the job of the people. Great. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you all for showing up.